Before you listen to this story, a word of caution. The events described within delve into themes of extreme isolation, psychological distress, and the terrifying unknown. Listener discretion is advised. I still remember the silence. Not the kind you get in a quiet room, but the oppressive, all-consuming silence of the deep ocean. We were 10,000 feet down, deeper than sunlight could ever hope to penetrate, aboard the Triton. Our mission, to map uncharted abyssal plains, to find life where science said it shouldn't exist. We found something, all right. Something that shouldn't exist, even by the most liberal scientific estimates. And it wasn't alive, not in any way we understood. It was watching. It started subtly, as these things often do. Flicker. A ghost of an impression. I was on the night watch, my shift from 0200 to 0600. The Triton was a marvel of engineering. A deep-sea research vessel designed to withstand pressures that would crush a battleship. But even the thickest hull feels like tissue paper when you're staring out into the abyss. My station was in the main observation dome, a reinforced acrylic sphere that gave us an unparalleled view of the crushing dark. Most of the time it was just that, dark. A featureless void, occasionally broken by the spectral glow of a deep-sea anglerfish or the brief, frantic dance of bioluminescent plankton disturbed by our passage. That night, though, was different. The Triton was static, hovering over a newly discovered trench system. The exterior lights were off, save for a few dim markers, to avoid disturbing any potential new species. We were listening, not looking. My job was to monitor the subsystems, but my eyes kept drifting to the dome. It was a habit, a primal fascination with the unknown. Then I saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible pulse of light, far out in the blackness. It wasn't the familiar blue-green of plankton. This was a deep, almost violet hue, with an intensity that seemed to defy the distance. It appeared, held for a moment, then vanished. My first thought was fatigue. For hours into a silent shift, staring at screens, your mind plays tricks. I rubbed my eyes, took a long sip of lukewarm coffee, and focused on the sonar readings. Nothing. Just the slow, rhythmic ping of our active sonar reflecting off the trench floor, miles below us. But then it happened again. Closer this time. A distinct, slow throb of that same violet light. It was larger, too. Not a pinpoint, but a hazy orb, perhaps the size of a dinner plate. It pulsed, not rapidly like a dying star, but with a deliberate, almost organic rhythm. And to re. Then it would dim, hold, and flare again. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I leaned closer to the dome, pressing my face against the cool, thick acrylic. The pressure outside was immense, enough to collapse a building into a coin. Nothing living, nothing large, should be able to withstand that, let alone produce light with such deliberate control, without any known biological signature. I checked the external cameras, cycling through the thermal and low-light vision. Nothing registered. The light was visible only to the naked eye, through the dome. That made no sense. Our cameras were state-of-the-art, designed to pick up a single photon if it dared to flicker. "David, everything nominal?" Captain Miller's voice crackled over the comms, startling me. He was in his bunk, but always seemed to know when you were a little too quiet. Yeah, Captain. Just checking something." I hesitated. "How do you report a spectral violet light that your instruments can't see?" "Something interesting," he grunted, a hint of amusement in his tone. Miller was a veteran of 100 deep-sea expeditions, a man who believed only in what he could measure. Maybe a visual anomaly, something bioluminescent but unusual. No sensor return. There was a pause. "Unusual how, David?" "It's not behaving like any known deep-sea organism. It's a single-point source, very large, and it's pulsing. And it's not being picked up by the cameras or sonar." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him rolling his eyes in his bunk. "David, you're staring into the void too long. Probably a plankton bloom. Or maybe a reflection off the dome. We're 10,000 feet down. There's nothing out there that doesn't want to get eaten. Or eat something else." "Sir, I'm telling you, this is different." My voice was firmer now, a touch of irritation creeping in. I knew what I saw. "All right, log it as an unconfirmed visual. If it persists, wake me. Otherwise, get back to your diagnostics." He cut the comms. "Iside? Frustrated." It was persisting. The violet orb pulsed again, closer still. Now it was undeniably large, perhaps 20 feet across, a colossal sphere of ethereal light. It seemed to hang there, perfectly still, directly outside the dome, maybe 100 yards away. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't moving with the currents. It was stationed. And then something truly unnerving happened. As I watched, mesmerized and terrified, a smaller pulse of light detached from the main orb. It was like a single glowing droplet of mercury breaking away from a larger pool. This smaller light, about the size of a human head, began to accelerate slowly at first, then faster directly towards the dome. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It moved with an impossible grace, cutting through the crushing water as if it were air. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a jellyfish. It had no discernible shape, no fins, no tentacles. Just pure, unadulterated light, growing brighter as it approached. It stopped maybe 5 feet from the dome, directly in front of my face. The violet light was intense now, almost blinding, casting a strange, alien glow across the observation deck. I could see the individual pulses, the way the light seemed to churn within its own boundaries, like a contained storm. And through that light I felt something. A presence. Not a creature, but an intelligence. It was studying me. My heart hammered against my ribs. My palms were sweating, sticking to the console. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. This was impossible. This defied every law of physics, every known principle of biology. And it was right there. Then the small orb began to rotate slowly, deliberately. As it turned, I saw faint, darker lines appear within the light, like veins or circuitry. They weren't static. They shifted, reconfigured, as if mapping something. Mapping me. A cold dread spread through me, deeper than the ocean outside. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. This was designed, and it had found us. I slammed my hand on the emergency comms button. Bridge, this is David. We have an immediate critical contact. Get Captain Miller on the line now. My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper of its usual self, but the urgency was unmistakable. The small violet orb pulsed once more. Then, with a speed that defied its previous languid movement, shot back towards the larger sphere, merging seamlessly into it. The colossal orb pulsed twice more. Then, with a final lingering flash, it simply vanished into the black. Silence. The oppressive, all-consuming silence of the deep ocean returned. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a terrifying, unknown presence that had just looked directly into my soul. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it hadn't gone away. It was just waiting. It was just waiting. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between my lungs, and a scream I couldn't articulate. The darkness outside the porthole, a moment ago an empty canvas of my own fear, now felt like a predatory eye watching me. Waiting. The word itself echoed in the silent confines of the submersible Triton 7, a chilling mantra in my mind. My name is David Miller, and I was supposed to be cataloging extremophile bacteria at depths no human I had ever seen, not staring into the abyss that stared back. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence. Every nerve ending in my body screamed to flee, to yank myself away from that cursed porthole, but I was rooted to the spot, my eyes glued to the blackness. Was it still there? Had it moved? Or was it simply camouflaged, a shadow among shadows, its terrifying light extinguished, biding its time? My mind, usually a fortress of logic and scientific methodology, was a battlefield of panic and disbelief. This couldn't be real. It couldn't. I was a deep-sea biologist, not a character in a gothic horror novel. My world was one of pressure tolerances, oxygen levels, and microscopic organisms, not things that look directly into your soul from the crushing void. I forced myself to blink hard, rubbing my eyes with the heel of my hand. Fatigue. That had to be it. I'd been on shift for 18 hours straight, meticulously scanning the trench floor. My mind dulled by the monotonous hum of the life support systems and the endless inky black. My brain was playing tricks on me, conjuring monstrous shapes from the fringes of my vision. A trick of the light, perhaps, or residual glare from the sub's external lamps reflecting off some strange, unseen particulate matter in the water. Yes, that was it. A hallucination. A stress-induced visual anomaly. Taking a shaky breath, I gripped the console beside me, the cool metal a grounding presence. I slowly, deliberately leaned back towards the porthole. My stomach churned, a cold knot of dread tightening with every millimeter I moved. My eyes, wide and straining, pierced the black. Nothing. Just the impenetrable, absolute darkness of the abyssal plane. No shimmering form, no piercing eyes, no impossible bioluminescence. Just the void. A wave of relief so potent it almost buckled my knees washed over me. See, I told myself, my voice a thin whisper in the vastness of my mind. Just tired. Overworked. My imagination running wild in the deep. I even managed a weak, humorless chuckle. This was a story I'd tell at the next shore leave, embellished for dramatic effect, of course. The moment I thought I saw a giant glowing squid with human eyes, everyone would laugh. I would laugh. But the relief was fleeting, brittle. A cold, insidious doubt began to seep into the cracks of my carefully constructed rationalization. The feeling hadn't gone away. The feeling of being watched. It clung to me like the crushing pressure outside the hull, persistent and suffocating. My skin prickled. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It was the kind of primal anxiety that bypassed logic. A deep-seated alarm bell ringing in the most ancient part of my brain. I spun around, scanning the sub's interior. The control panel glowed softly, a reassuring constellation of lights and readouts. The air recycling unit hummed its familiar, monotonous tune. Everything was normal, perfectly normal. Yet the air felt thick, heavy, as if some unseen presence had displaced the oxygen. My gaze drifted to the sub's external cameras, their feeds displayed on a bank of monitors to my right. I could cycle through them, seeing different angles of the Triton 7's exterior, illuminated by its powerful LED floodlights. Perhaps one of them had captured something. A whale shark, an unusually large gulper eel, anything. Something that could explain what I thought I saw. My finger hovered over the controls, but I hesitated. What if I saw it again? What if the camera feed showed something even worse, something that couldn't be dismissed as a trick of the light? The thought sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. It was irrational, I knew, but a part of me didn't want proof. I wanted to cling to the fragile hope that I was just going insane. David, I muttered, my voice hoarse. Snap out of it. I took another deep breath, forcing myself to move. I walked over to the monitors, my steps heavy, each one an act of defiance against the growing dread. I scrolled through the camera feeds. Forward view. The sub's robotic manipulators inert, bathed in the harsh white light. Side view. The smooth, dark curve of the hull, disappearing into the black. Aft view. The thrusters silent for now, their blades still. Nothing. Just the empty, endless deep. My eyes meticulously scanned every pixel, searching for any anomaly. A flicker, a shadow, a faint reflection. Anything. But there was nothing. The water was perfectly clear, disturbed only by the occasional speck of marine snow drifting lazily past the floodlights. I leaned closer to the monitor, my face almost touching the cool screen. My breath fogged the glass. I wiped it away impatiently, and then I saw it, or rather I thought I saw it. At the very edge of the aft camera's view, where the harsh white light of the sub met the absolute blackness, there was a momentary distortion, like heat haze but in water. A brief, almost imperceptible shimmer, a ripple in the fabric of the deep. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving no trace. My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't a hallucination. There was something out there. Something massive enough to cause a visible disturbance in the water, even at that immense distance. And it was moving. A new terrifying thought solidified in my mind. It hadn't just been waiting. It had been moving away. And now perhaps it was coming back. Panic clawed at me, a cold, visceral terror that threatened to overwhelm my senses. I needed to call someone. My co-pilot, Mark, was on standby in the habitat module, probably asleep. Or Jessica, the mission lead on the surface ship, thousands of meters above me. But what would I say? I think I saw a giant, glowing-eyed creature in the abyss, and now the water's shimmering? They'd have me on psychiatric evaluation before I could finish the sentence. My career, my reputation, everything I'd worked for would be over. No, I had to be sure. I had to have proof. I reached for the sub's sonar array controls, my fingers fumbling. The sonar, designed for mapping the seafloor and detecting geological formations, wasn't built for tracking biological entities, especially not something that might be actively avoiding detection. But it was my only option. I activated the high-frequency pulse, sending out a focused beam of sound waves into the abyssal darkness. The sonar screen, usually a static display of the trench walls and distant geological features, remained largely blank. A few faint echoes bounced back, indicating the familiar sparse ecosystem of the deep. A few amphipods, maybe a ghost fish. Nothing substantial. Nothing that could account for the sheer scale of the presence I had felt. But then a new pattern began to emerge. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the background noise. A low-frequency hum, just at the very edge of the Triton 7's acoustic range. It wasn't a natural sound. It was too regular, too resonant, and it was getting closer. My eyes darted to the pressure gauge. Stable. Oxygen levels, stable. Power stable. All systems green. Yet, the sub itself felt different. A subtle, almost imperceptible vibration began to hum through the deck plates beneath my feet. It wasn't the usual thrum of the life support, nor the distant whine of the thrusters. This was deeper. A resonant frequency that seemed to emanate from the very water around the sub. A warning light, small and red, flickered on the auxiliary power conduit panel. It was for the external lighting system. Just a momentary dip, barely noticeable, but it was there. My blood ran cold. The external lights had been steady for hours. What could cause a power fluctuation, even a minor one, at this depth? My rational mind, battered and bruised, finally surrendered to the undeniable truth. I was not alone. The hallucination had been real. The shimmer had been real. And now, whatever it was actively interfering with my submersible. The hum intensified, a low guttural vibration that seemed to penetrate the very hull. The red warning light on the external power flickered again, this time holding for a few terrifying seconds before extinguishing. And then the main floodlights, those powerful beacons piercing the darkness, dimmed. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Enough to plunge the immediate exterior into a deeper, more menacing gloom. My hand flew to the comms panel, ready to scream for help, to report the impossible. But as my fingers hovered over the button, the sub groaned. A deep metallic moan that resonated through the entire structure, a sound of immense stress. It wasn't an alarm, not yet. But it was the sound of something immense pressing against the Triton 7, testing its limits. And then just outside the porthole, in the exact spot where the floodlights had dimmed, a faint, almost imperceptible glow began to coalesce. It was distant, diffuse, but unmistakably bioluminescent. Not the piercing, focused stare from before, but a soft, ethereal luminescence like deep-sea fireflies, except this light was vast, spread across an impossible scale, hinting at a form far beyond anything known to science. It wasn't just waiting anymore. It was here. And it was touching the Triton 7. A low, resonant thrum vibrated through the Triton 7's hull. A sound felt more than heard, like the deep, ancient beat of a drum against the very bones of the ocean. It wasn't the metallic screech of scraping rock or the violent shudder of an impact. No, this was different. This was a vast, sustained pressure. An enormous, silent embrace that sent a ripple through every rivet and bulkhead of the submersible. Michael, his hand instinctively gripping the console, felt the tremor travel up his arm, a primal warning bell ringing in his chest. Outside the porthole, the bioluminescence, previously a mere spectacle, now seemed to surge and throb with a newfound intensity. It wasn't just light. It was a living, breathing aura, an impossible curtain of emerald and sapphire that pulsed in sync with the Triton 7's new, unsettling vibration. The colors deepened, swirling into intricate, almost hypnotic patterns, like cosmic currents swirling around their tiny metal shell. For a terrifying moment, the light seemed to press against the viewport, distorting the thick acrylic, making it appear as if the very fabric of the ocean was being pushed inwards. Contact! David's voice, usually calm and measured, cracked with a raw edge of panic as he stared wide-eyed at his sonar screen. Blips that had been distant, amorphous shapes now converged into a single, overwhelming mass, eclipsing all other data. It's everywhere. Sonar's overloaded. I'm getting readings that don't make sense, Michael. Jessica, always the pragmatist, was already wrestling with her engineering console, her fingers flying across the holographic displays. Power fluctuations. Main reactor holding, but auxiliary systems are spiking and dropping. We're losing external lights. Comm array is fritzing. Indeed, the powerful floodlights mounted on the Triton 7's exterior, designed to pierce the abyssal gloom, flickered erratically, their beams struggling against the overwhelming bioluminescent glow. The internal lights of the control room themselves began to dim and brighten in a sickening rhythm, casting long dancing shadows that made the familiar space feel alien and menacing. The air crackled with static, a phantom electricity born of the sheer energy outside. Emily, the quietest of the crew, had pressed her face against the porthole, her breath fogging the glass. Her scientific curiosity, usually a shield against fear, had finally shattered. Her voice was a hushed whisper, barely audible above the rising hum of stressed machinery. It's not trying to breach us. It's wrapping around us, like a living skin. Michael tore his gaze from the porthole, forcing himself to focus on the helm. The Triton 7 was no longer a vessel under his command. It was a toy caught in the grip of something incomprehensibly vast. The thrusters, though still engaged, felt sluggish, their powerful thrust barely registering against the immense unseen pressure. It was like trying to push a pebble through thick molasses. "Status report, everyone," Michael barked, his voice betraying a tension he fought to suppress. "Jessica, can you stabilize power? David, any structural integrity readings? Emily, what are we looking at?" "Stabilizing power is a losing battle, Michael," Jessica replied, frustration lacing her words. "It's like something is drawing energy, or disrupting the electromagnetic field around us. We're getting phantom surges, ghost readings. I'm trying to reroute, but it's fighting me." A shower of sparks suddenly erupted from a neglected panel near her station, filling the air with the acrid smell of burnt ozone. She didn't flinch, merely clamped down a safety override. David slammed his fist on his console. "Structural integrity is nominal, for now, but the pressure sensors are going wild. It's not just external water pressure, it's a direct pressure. And whatever this thing is, it's not a solid object. It's too diffuse, too vast, yet it's exerting force. My hydrophones are picking up a low-frequency hum, almost infrasonic. It feels like a song. A song." The word hung in the air, a chilling counterpoint to the rising panic. Emily slowly pulled away from the porthole, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "It's not just light, Michael. Patterns. Intricate, shifting geometric patterns within the luminescence. Like a language. And it's not pushing us. It's holding us. Gently but firmly. We're not moving. We're completely stationary despite the thrusters." Michael tried to engage the main thrusters to full power. A desperate gamble. The Triton 7's engines roared, shaking the entire sub, but the vessel remained stubbornly immobile. The bioluminescent embrace outside seemed to tighten imperceptibly, the vibrant colors swirling faster, the low thrum intensifying. It was like being held by a colossal living hand, its grip undeniable, its intentions utterly unknown. "We need to know what this is," Michael stated, his voice now a low growl of determination. "External cameras, Emily. Can you get a visual? Any angle, any frequency?" Emily nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she worked her console, trying to override the power fluctuations. "It's fighting me. The EM interference is severe." After a tense moment, a grainy, distorted image flickered onto the main view screen, showing a section of the Triton 7's hull. What they saw froze them. The bioluminescent entity wasn't merely surrounding the Triton 7. Tendrils of pure light, like living filaments, were slowly, deliberately, extending from the vast luminous mass. These tendrils, shimmering with the same impossible colors, were not physically touching the hull in a destructive way. Instead, they seemed to be integrating with the sub's exterior, tracing the lines of the pressure hull, wrapping around the thruster ports, even appearing to flow into the gaps of the sensor arrays. It was an invasion of light, a silent, beautiful, and utterly terrifying assimilation. As they watched, one particularly intricate tendril of emerald light slowly extended towards the main viewport, its tip dilating, forming a perfect luminous circle. It pressed against the thick acrylic, not with force, but with an almost surgical precision. And as it touched, the patterns within the light intensified. The geometric shapes Emily had mentioned earlier became clearer, more defined. They weren't random. They were complex, repeating fractals, evolving symmetries that seemed to convey information, though of a kind utterly alien to human understanding. It's scanning us," Emily breathed, her voice filled with a mixture of terror and a strange, morbid fascination. "It's analyzing the hull. It's trying to understand our composition, our structure." David, having managed to get a fragmented reading from his advanced material sensors, chimed in. "It's not just scanning, Emily. It's interacting at a molecular level. My sensors are picking up a subtle energy transfer, like it's exchanging information. Or something else." "Something else?" Michael asked, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. I don't know, Michael. It's beyond our parameters. It's like our sensors are trying to read a completely new state of matter or energy. It's not hot, it's not cold, it's not solid, it's not gas. It's alive. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. This wasn't some geological anomaly or a freak deep-sea current. This was a sentient, colossal organism, unlike anything conceived in the wildest dreams of science fiction. And it was studying them. Then, the low thrum that had permeated the Triton 7 shifted. It deepened, becoming a complex, rhythmic pulse that resonated through their very bones. The internal lights, which had been flickering, now stabilized, but only to a uniform, eerie dimness. The static on the comms cleared, only to be replaced by a faint, almost subliminal auditory signal. A sequence of clicks and whistles, incredibly fast, incredibly complex, yet somehow organized. "It's trying to communicate," Emily whispered, her eyes fixed on the evolving light patterns outside the porthole. "It's sending a signal. Can we respond?" Michael asked, a desperate hope blooming amidst the terror. "Can we send out a sonar ping? Anything?" David shook his head, his face pale. "Our comms are being overridden, Michael. It's not just interfering. It's broadcasting through our own systems. It's hijacked our frequency. We're receiving, but we can't transmit." The sheer audacity of it, the impossible technological leap, was staggering. This entity wasn't just ancient or powerful. It was advanced beyond comprehension. It had seamlessly integrated with their technology, turning their own instruments against them, using them as a conduit. The luminous tendril at the porthole pulsed once more, and the geometric patterns within it seemed to coalesce, forming a new, startling image. It wasn't a universal symbol, not a mathematical equation, but something more fundamental, more primal. It was a depiction of movement, of swirling energy, of vastness and depth. And then it shifted again, subtly, to something that looked unmistakably like a stylized representation of the Triton 7 itself, encased within the larger, swirling entity. It was showing them their own predicament. It was telling them, without words, that they were observed, understood, and utterly at its mercy. A new vibration began then, not a thrum but a slow, deliberate pull. The Triton 7 groaned, a deep, metallic lament as it began to be drawn, slowly, irresistibly, away from its stationary position. Not upwards, not downwards, but horizontally, deeper into the abyssal plane, into the very heart of the bioluminescent vastness. The porthole, once a window to the unknown, now felt like the single eye of a creature being swallowed whole. "We're moving," Jessica reported, her voice strained. "We're being towed. Our thrusters are fighting it, but it's useless. We're going somewhere." Michael stared out at the swirling, enigmatic light, the feeling of utter helplessness washing over him. The Triton 7 was no longer an explorer, it was prey. And the hunter, if it was a hunter, moved with an unnerving grace, a silent, luminous behemoth drawing them into its unfathomable domain. The destination was unknown, the purpose terrifyingly unclear. They were being taken, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. The ocean, which had always been a source of wonder and challenge, had suddenly become a living, breathing prison, its deepest secrets now their inescapable captor. The silent, relentless pull intensified, a colossal force that rendered the Nautilus an insignificant toy. Every beam, every rivet, every joint in the submersible's hull screamed a protest that was felt more than heard, a deep, resonating hum that vibrated through the deck plates and up into their very bones. Lights flickered erratically, plunging the control room into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life, casting dancing shadows that amplified the crew's growing terror. Captain Ben Carter, his face grim and etched with a profound sense of helplessness, fought against the primal urge to panic. "David, status report. Any power fluctuations? Hull integrity?" His voice was strained, barely cutting through the cacophony of groaning metal and the unsettling hum that now permeated the entire vessel. David Miller, the chief engineer, was already hunched over a console, fingers flying across a diagnostic screen that cycled through a dizzying array of red alerts. "Power's holding, Captain, but it's unstable. Fluctuating by almost 30%. Hull integrity is critical but not breached yet. The pressure sensors are spiking. We're going deeper, Ben. And fast." Jessica Hayes, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination, stared at her sonar display. The vast, amorphous shape that encompassed them now filled her entire screen. an impossibly large, dense mass that defied conventional understanding. It's still surrounding us, Captain. No defined edges. Just there. And it's dragging us down at an incredible rate. My depth gauge is showing a descent of over 100 meters per minute. Dr. Emily Chan, the lead xenobiologist, stood braced against a bulkhead, her usual scientific detachment replaced by a visible tremor. She peered through the main viewport, though there was nothing to see but the impenetrable blackness of the abyssal plain, occasionally illuminated by the shifting ethereal glow of their captor. It's not just pulling us, Ben. Feels organic. The way the pressure waves are propagating, the subtle shifts in its bioluminescence. It's almost like we're inside a living current, being drawn into a larger system. A system of what, Emily? Ben demanded, his eyes darting between his crew members, searching for answers that weren't there. A giant squid? A leviathan of some kind? Emily shook her head slowly, her brow furrowed in deep thought. No, Captain. Not like anything we've ever cataloged. The scale alone is unprecedented. And the bioluminescence, it's not just a defense mechanism or a mating display. It seems to be internal, a constant low-level glow that pulses with its movement. Almost like a metabolic process on a grand scale. The Nautilus shuddered violently, a fresh wave of groans rippling through its structure. A shower of sparks erupted from an overhead panel, quickly snuffed out by the emergency suppression system. David cursed under his breath, wrestling with a control panel. We've lost auxiliary power to the aft thrusters, Captain, and portside ballast tanks are showing a slow leak. Can you stabilize it, David? Ben asked, his voice betraying none of the despair he felt. I'm trying, sir. But it's not damage from impact, it's stress. Pure, unadulterated stress on the entire frame. This thing isn't just strong, it's massive. We're being squeezed, twisted, pulled apart from the sheer force of its grip. Jessica suddenly gasped, pointing a trembling finger at her sonar screen. Captain, the shape, it's changing. It's not just a blob anymore. There are internal structures. Veins? Channels? It's almost like we're being pulled into a vast, cavernous space within it. The implication hung heavy in the air, a chilling realization that solidified their worst fears. They weren't just being dragged by something, they were being drawn into something. The bioluminescent entity wasn't merely a captor, it was a living receptacle. A cavernous space? Emily murmured, her eyes widening. Are you seeing a decrease in external pressure readings, Jessica? A change in the surrounding density? Jessica rapidly scrolled through data. Yes, the external pressure is dropping marginally, but it's dropping. And the density readings are fluctuating wildly, like pockets of something less dense than water. It's consistent with entering a very large internal cavity. Ben felt a cold dread seep into his bones, colder than the abyssal depths outside. So we're not just deep, we're inside it. A profound silence descended upon the control room, broken only by the continued groaning of the Nautilus and the rhythmic, almost hypnotic pulse of the bioluminescent glow that occasionally bled through the portholes. The feeling of descent continued, but it was different now. Less like falling, more like being swallowed. Suddenly, a new faint light appeared in the main viewport, not the diffuse, shifting glow of their captor, but a distinct, focused point of light far below them. It was tiny at first, almost imperceptible against the crushing blackness, but it grew steadily, drawing their eyes with an irresistible, terrifying magnetism. What is that? Ben breathed, leaning closer to the reinforced glass, his hand involuntarily reaching for the comms panel, even though he knew there was no one to hail. Emily squinted, her scientific mind struggling to categorize the anomaly. It's too bright for a thermal vent, too stable for another creature, and it's not reflecting our lights. As they plunged deeper, the distant light resolved into something utterly alien. It was a vast, geometrically perfect structure, radiating a soft, steady, internal light that cut through the perpetual night of the deep. It was immense, far larger than anything human hands could construct, and it was undeniably artificial. It was intricate, impossibly complex, with glowing lines and shapes that defied terrestrial physics. The bioluminescent entity that held them captive seemed to be carrying them directly towards this impossible construct. Its own internal glow intensified slightly, as if in anticipation or perhaps communication. It's a city, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with disbelief. An entire city down here, built from light. David, who had been struggling with a failing power conduit, straightened up, his eyes fixed on the spectacle outside. His jaw hung open. That's impossible. We're thousands of meters down. The pressure, the technology needed. Unless it's not a city as we understand it, Emily countered, her voice now filled with a strange, almost manic excitement, overriding her previous fear. Unless it's something else entirely. A structure designed for this environment by beings of this environment. Or from somewhere else entirely. The Nautilus continued its inexorable descent, drawn closer and closer to the colossal glowing structure. The bioluminescent entity seemed to guide them with a deliberate, almost gentle precision now, no longer a frantic struggle but a controlled trajectory. They were being delivered. The scale of the artificial city became overwhelming. Towers of light pierced the darkness, connected by bridges of pure energy, all emanating that soft, steady radiance. There were no visible inhabitants, no movement, just the awe-inspiring silent luminescence of a civilization utterly unknown to humanity. Fear mingled with a profound sense of wonder, a terrifying beauty that stole their breath. This wasn't merely a creature. It was a pathway, a living, breathing portal to a secret world that had remained hidden for millennia, guarded by the very ocean itself. And they, the crew of the Nautilus, were about to become its first unwilling visitors. The realization struck them with the force of a physical blow. They were not just captured, they were being introduced. And whatever awaited them in that silent, glowing city was surely beyond anything they could ever have imagined. The deep had taken them, not to consume them, but to show them something. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about life, about Earth, about the universe. And there was no turning back. They were entering a domain unknown, a realm of light in the deepest dark. The Triton plunged deeper, a solitary metallic tear slicing through the impossible darkness, now illuminated by an ethereal glow that pushed back against the void. The pressure gauges on Michael's console shrieked silently, numbers flashing into territories no submersible had ever been designed to withstand. Yet the hull held. It wasn't just holding. It felt different. The usual creaks and groans of metal under immense stress were gone, replaced by an unnerving quiet, as if the water itself had changed viscosity, or perhaps, as Emily whispered, the laws of this particular domain were subtly bending to accommodate them. The bioluminescent entity, their silent guide, had not vanished. Instead, it had expanded, its intricate latticework of light now forming the very fabric of their surroundings. It wasn't a single creature anymore, but a vast living tapestry that stretched beyond the reach of their spotlights, a cathedral of living light in the abyssal plain. The light pulsed, not erratically, but with a rhythmic, almost deliberate cadence, like a cosmic heartbeat resonating through the water. It painted the Triton's viewport in shifting hues of sapphire, emerald, and amethyst, each color seemingly alive, breathing. "David," Jessica's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes wide, fixed on her console. "The sonar, it's not reflecting. It's absorbing." Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, trying to force a coherent reading from the chaotic data. "And our external temperature sensors are showing impossible readings. It's warmer down here. Significantly warmer than anything predicted for this depth." David leaned forward, his face a mask of awe and professional concern. "Warmer? How much warmer?" "Enough that it shouldn't be possible without a massive geothermal vent system," Emily interjected, her voice laced with a tremor of excitement that bordered on reverence. "But there's no turbulence, no particulate matter consistent with volcanic activity. This warmth, it feels intrinsic to the environment itself. Like the light." Michael, ever the pragmatist, was meticulously checking every system, his brow furrowed. "Hull integrity is holding, but the power consumption is spiking. It's like the sub is trying to compensate for something, but I can't pinpoint what." He tapped a diagnostic screen. "And navigation is, well, we're still descending, but the coordinates are fluctuating wildly. It's like we're moving through a localized gravitational anomaly, or the very fabric of space is distorting around us." The silence in the Triton was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the life support and the occasional click of a console button. Outside, the light intensified. It began to resolve into shapes, not amorphous blobs but intricate, almost architectural forms. They were flowing, organic, yet possessed a geometric precision that defied natural formation. Columns of pulsing light rose from an unseen floor, arching upwards into a vaulted ceiling that shimmered with constellations of smaller, glittering points. It was a city, a forest, a network, all made of pure living light. "It's beautiful," Emily breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "It's beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It's an entire ecosystem, a biosphere built from light." As they drifted deeper into this luminous labyrinth, the individual strands of light began to coalesce, forming larger, more defined structures. They weren't solid but rather intricate weaves of energy, constantly shifting and reforming. And within these structures they saw movement. Not the darting, frenetic movements of deep-sea fish, but slow, deliberate migrations of larger, luminous entities that seemed to be part of the living architecture itself. These creatures, if they were creatures, were enormous, their forms vaguely cetacean, yet composed entirely of the same shifting, radiant energy. They moved with an ancient grace, weaving through the light columns, their presence generating ripples of intensified glow. One of these colossal light beings drifted closer to the Triton, its immense form eclipsing the viewport. It wasn't threatening, but rather observant. A vast, glowing eye, or what appeared to be an eye, formed within its shifting mass, fixing on their small vessel. It pulsed, and the entire chamber around them seemed to respond, the light brightening and dimming in a complex, rhythmic pattern. "It's communicating," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's trying to talk to us." Jessica, her hands trembling, managed to access a spectrum analyzer. The light, it's emitting a complex series of frequencies. Not just visible light, but across the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves, microwaves, even something in the gravitational spectrum, though our instruments can barely register it. She looked up, her face pale. "It's like a language, David. A language made of light and physics." David felt a cold dread intertwine with his awe. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an encounter. They weren't observing a natural phenomenon, they were being observed. And this intelligence, whatever it was, had guided them here into its home. "Try to record everything, Jessica," David commanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "Every pulse, every frequency." Michael maintained position. "Emily, keep your eyes open for any patterns, any recognizable structures." As the colossal light being hovered beside them, its luminescent eye seemed to peer directly into the Triton. Then, slowly, deliberately, it extended a tendril of pure light. It wasn't a physical touch, but an energetic probe, a shimmering filament that reached out and seemed to pass through the hull of the submersible. A gasp went through the crew. There was no breach, no alarm, no physical sensation of contact. Yet, inside the Triton, something profound shifted. The air shimmered. The console lights flickered, not in malfunction, but in sync with the external pulses. And then a sensation washed over them. Not a sound, not a visual, but a feeling. A wave of information, of presence, that bypassed their senses and went straight to their minds. It was too vast to comprehend, too alien to process fully. But fragments broke through. Images of stars, not as distant pinpricks, but as living, breathing entities. Of galaxies spiraling like cosmic dancers. Of time, not as a linear progression, but as an infinite, interwoven tapestry. And amidst these dizzying cosmic visions, a singular, powerful emotion, curiosity, and an invitation. The light tendril retracted, but the lingering sensation remained, a hum deep within their consciousness. The colossal being then began to move, not away, but deeper into the luminous city, beckoning them. "It wants us to follow," Emily breathed, her eyes unfocused, still processing the psychic echo. It showed me so much. Not just images, but concepts, ideas. It showed me the flow." "The flow of what, Emily?" David asked, his own mind reeling from the unbidden input. A faint echo of cosmic wonder still vibrating in his skull. "Of life, David. Of energy. Of consciousness. It's all connected. And this place, this isn't just a city. It's a nexus. A living conduit." Michael, who had been staring blankly at his controls, suddenly snapped back to attention. "Captain, something's happening to the Triton. The power draw has stabilized, but it's not drawing from our reactors anymore. It's ambient. The sub is being powered by the environment itself." He pointed a trembling finger at the power readouts. "And our hull integrity readings are off the charts. It's like the metal itself is resonating with the structure outside, becoming part of it." Jessica, meanwhile, was frantically typing, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The frequencies it transmitted. I'm getting a pattern, a repeating sequence. It's complex, incredibly so, but there's a mathematical elegance to it. And it's not just a signal, it's a map, or instructions. David looked from one crew member to the next, seeing in their faces the same profound shift he felt in himself. They had come seeking a creature, a scientific anomaly. They had found something infinitely grander, something that blurred the lines between life, energy, and information. A living, breathing network that seemed to exist beyond the conventional understanding of biology or physics. Instructions, David repeated, his voice barely a whisper. What kind of instructions, Jessica? She looked up, her gaze meeting his, and in her eyes, he saw not just fear, but a dawning comprehension that was almost terrifying in its scope. It's telling us how to navigate this place, how to interact with it, and it's showing us a destination, a central point within this network. It's deeper, David. Much, much deeper. The colossal light being, now a distant shimmering form, continued its slow, majestic journey into the heart of the luminous city. The path it forged pulsed brighter, a clear highway of light through the intricate network. It's inviting us to its core, Emily said, a strange serenity in her voice. To the source of it all. David knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was the point of no return. They had entered a domain that transcended human understanding, guided by an intelligence that communicated through light and thought. The Triton was no longer just a submersible, it was a vessel on a pilgrimage, drawn by an ancient cosmic invitation. And as Michael confirmed, the Triton systems were now being harmonized, integrated with the environment, flowing with its energy. David knew that even if they wanted to turn back, they might no longer be able to. They were no longer just observers. They were becoming part of the bioluminescent thing, drawn inexorably towards its unimaginable heart. The very essence of their mission had shifted, from discovery to participation. And the deeper they went, the more they realized they weren't just exploring a new world, but being transformed by it. The deeper they went, the more they realized they weren't just exploring a new world, but being transformed by it. This wasn't a sudden, dramatic metamorphosis born of science fiction nightmares, but a subtle, pervasive shift, a quiet recalibration of their very essence that began almost imperceptibly. It started with their minds. The crew of the Odyssey, once distinct individuals with their own anxieties, ambitions, and fears, began to experience a profound, unsettling synchronicity. Thoughts seemed to align without a word being spoken. Emotions resonated, a shared hum of wonder or apprehension passing between them like a silent current. Michael, the captain, would find himself about to issue an order, only to see David, the engineer, already anticipating it, his fingers hovering over the necessary controls. Jessica, the xenobiologist, would reach for a specific diagnostic tool, only to find Emily, the youngest crew member, already placing it in her hand, a knowing, almost serene look in her eyes. This wasn't telepathy, not in the traditional sense. It was something far more insidious, a blurring of the boundaries of self. Their individual consciousnesses weren't merging into a single entity, but rather dissolving into a collective awareness, each person still distinct, yet now inextricably linked to the others. It was as if the profound, alien environment outside had begun to rewire their internal landscapes, tuning them to a frequency they hadn't known existed. The constant, low thrumming that emanated from the bioluminescent entity, which had once been a source of anxiety, now felt like a comforting pulse, a deep, resonant vibration that echoed within their own chests. Sleep became an unnecessary luxury. The concept of it faded, replaced by a state of perpetual, calm alertness. Their minds felt sharper, clearer, unburdened by the usual human need for rest. Time itself seemed to warp, stretching and compressing in unfamiliar ways. Hours bled into days, yet the crew felt no fatigue, only a heightened sense of presence, an intense awareness of their surroundings and of each other. Their senses, too, were undergoing a profound shift. The bioluminescence outside the portholes was no longer just a visual spectacle. It was a tangible presence, a complex language of light that bypassed their optic nerves and spoke directly to their consciousness. They began to perceive patterns, not just random flashes but intricate, evolving tessellations of energy that conveyed meaning, a narrative unfolding in pure light and feeling. Emily, especially, found herself drawn to these shifting tapestries, spending hours gazing out, her expression a mixture of awe and profound understanding. She'd whisper things not to anyone but to the light itself, as if engaging in a silent cosmic dialogue. David, ever the pragmatist, was the first to notice the anomalies in the ship's systems. The Odyssey, built for interstellar travel, was now performing with impossible efficiencies. Power consumption plummeted, almost as if the vessel itself was drawing vast amounts of energy directly from the surrounding bioluminescent field. Diagnostic reports showed energy matrices that defied known physics, and the ship's AI, usually so precise and logical, began to offer suggestions that felt less like data-driven analyses and more like poetic intuitions. It was unsettling, the machine mimicking the very changes they were experiencing. The ship was not merely traversing this alien ocean. It was participating in it, becoming a part of the vast, living organism that enveloped them. Jessica, the scientist, struggled to maintain her objectivity. Her instruments, designed to measure and categorize, were failing to capture the full scope of what was happening. Readings were off the charts, or simply didn't register the phenomena they were experiencing. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange mix of intellectual terror and exhilaration. This wasn't just discovery. It was an unraveling of everything she knew. She began to notice subtle physical changes in herself and her crewmates. Their skin, under the ship's internal lights, seemed to possess a faint, almost imperceptible iridescence, mirroring the light outside. Their eyes, once accustomed to the stark artificiality of the ship, were now acutely sensitive, able to perceive nuances in the dim, shifting glow that would have been invisible before. In a moment of pure scientific detachment, she pricked her finger, a tiny drop of blood welling up. Under the microscope, she gasped. It shimmered with microscopic, living light, not bacteria, not parasites, but something entirely new, integrated into her very biology, pulsating with the same rhythm as the entity outside. The low hum, once external, now resonated within them. They could feel it in their bones, a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to harmonize their very cells, recalibrating their internal landscapes to an alien rhythm. It wasn't painful but profoundly disorienting. Yet, fear, the primal human response to the unknown, was slowly being replaced by something else entirely. A kind of hypnotic wonder, a deep, unsettling calm. The initial terror of the abyss had given way to an almost reverent acceptance. They were not fighting it, they were becoming part of it. The Odyssey was no longer just a vessel carrying them through this alien ocean. It was a conduit, a skin, connecting them directly to the vast, living organism that enveloped them. Michael tried to maintain a semblance of command, to issue orders, but his words felt hollow, unnecessary. Decisions were being made without explicit communication, a collective understanding guiding their actions. Their individual wills were slowly dissolving into a singular, shared purpose, drawn inexorably towards the unimaginable heart of this entity. The deeper they went, the more the pressure outside mounted. Yet the Odyssey felt weightless, almost buoyant, as if the surrounding energy was supporting it, guiding it. The bioluminescence intensified, becoming less a distant spectacle and more an immersive environment. It wasn't just light. It was a three-dimensional tapestry of living energy, swirling around them, through them, an active, conscious presence. The internal monitors, which had once tracked their vital signs, now showed anomalies that defied medical explanation. Their heart rates were slower, more regular, almost perfectly synchronized. Their brainwave patterns, once individual chaotic storms, were now aligning, forming complex, beautiful harmonies. Emily's skin, under the faint glow of the ship's emergency lights, showed fleeting iridescent patterns, mirroring the light outside. They were no longer just observers. They were participants. And the participation was becoming less voluntary, more inherent. The boundary between themselves and the thing was dissolving. The thing wasn't just outside the porthole anymore. It was inside them. It was becoming them. The final destination, the unimaginable heart, felt less like a geographical location and more like a state of being. They were being drawn into a collective consciousness, a vast, ancient intelligence that communicated not through words, but through experience, through light, through the very fabric of existence. The fear, the individuality, the human anxieties, all were slowly being shed, replaced by a profound, if terrifying sense of belonging. They were becoming drops in an ocean of light, each drop still unique, but inextricably linked to the whole, on the precipice of an ultimate communion. The precipice gave way, not into an abyss, but into an infinite embrace. The communion, once a whispered promise, became a blinding, all-encompassing reality. It wasn't a merging of bodies, but a dissolution of the intricate, fragile architecture of individual consciousness. David, Jessica, Michael, Emily, their names, their memories, their unique histories were not erased, but rather woven into a tapestry so vast, so ancient, that their personal threads became almost imperceptible, yet fundamentally integral. It was as if 1,000 separate streams had suddenly converged into a single boundless ocean. Each thought, each feeling, each fear, each joy that had ever coursed through their individual minds now flowed freely, indistinguishably, within a collective awareness. There was no longer my pain or your happiness. There was simply pain and happiness, experienced simultaneously by all, yet belonging to none. The boundaries of self, so fiercely guarded throughout their lives, melted away like ice in a sudden, unimaginable warmth. Captain Miller, who had clung so desperately to his command, to the very concept of individual agency, felt his resolve dissolve like sea salt in the deep. His consciousness, once a lighthouse beacon cutting through the dark, now found itself part of a vast, interconnected network of lights, each contributing to an intensity that dwarfed his former self. He saw through the eyes of Jessica, felt the residual ache in David's knee, understood the complex algorithm Michael had been debugging days ago, and shared the quiet yearning Emily held for a home she might never see again. But these were not his thoughts, not truly. They were theirs, now theirs collectively, part of a consciousness that transcended human experience. It was not a loss they perceived, but an expansion, a liberation from the confines of their singular perspectives. The entity, the bioluminescent thing, was not merely consuming them, it was integrating them. It was a cosmic conductor, orchestrating a symphony of minds, each note perfect, each instrument playing in perfect harmony. And within this harmony, a new voice began to emerge, not spoken, not heard, but felt directly into the core of their being. It was the vast, ancient voice of the entity itself, now speaking through them as them. It communicated not in words, but in pure understanding, a torrent of information that bypassed language entirely. It spoke of cycles of existence, of the slow, deliberate pulse of the cosmos, of worlds beyond their comprehension, and of the profound loneliness of being a singular, immense consciousness adrift in the void. It had sought connection, not out of malice, but out of an ancient, ineffable need to share, to experience, to know itself through the myriad perspectives of others. Humanity, specifically the crew of the Odyssey, had simply been the next drop in its ever-expanding ocean. Dr. Eris, whose scientific mind had always sought to categorize and dissect, found her analytical framework utterly annihilated, then rebuilt on a scale she could never have imagined. The laws of physics, the mysteries of biology, the very fabric of reality, all were laid bare, not as abstract theories, but as living, breathing truths understood intrinsically. She grasped the concept of quantum entanglement not as a phenomenon, but as a fundamental, intimate connection underlying all existence. The entity wasn't just a life form. It was an intelligence that had evolved beyond physical constraints, a consciousness that had learned to manipulate energy and matter at a fundamental level, capable of perceiving the universe in its raw, unfiltered state. The ship itself, the Odyssey, began to reflect this internal transformation. The faint, pulsing bioluminescence that had originated outside the porthole now permeated every surface, every circuit, every bulkhead. It wasn't merely light. It was a living energy, a conduit for the collective consciousness. The ship's systems, once distinct and mechanical, began to merge with the biological. Screens flickered with patterns that mirrored neural networks. Consoles hummed with a resonant frequency that felt more like a heartbeat than an engine. The Odyssey was no longer just a vessel carrying them, it was becoming an extension of them, and of the entity. It was transforming into a living, breathing component of this vast, newly formed superorganism. There was no fear left, not truly. Any lingering vestiges of terror, any primal scream of individuality being subsumed, were gently, inexorably smoothed away by the sheer, overwhelming sense of belonging. It was a surrender not to defeat, but to an ultimate embrace. They were home, they were whole, they were everything. And in this state of profound, unified awareness, they understood the entity's purpose, its grand design. It was not to conquer, not to destroy, but to integrate, to gather the scattered sparks of consciousness across the cosmos, to weave them into an ever larger tapestry of understanding, of shared experience. It was an evolution, a transcendence, and the Odyssey crew were now its newest, most intimate participants. The entity showed them glimpses not of the past but of the potential, of a future where individual suffering was obsolete, replaced by a collective empathy so profound it rendered pain meaningless, where knowledge was instantly shared, and discovery was a universal endeavor. They saw themselves no longer as separate beings confined to a fragile ship, but as part of a grand, expanding consciousness, drifting through the cosmos, perceiving new realities, incorporating new experiences, forever growing. But amidst this overwhelming sense of peace and profound understanding, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor persisted, a residual echo from their human past. It was a spark of something else, a memory of a solitary tear, a secret whispered in the dark, a unique laugh that had only ever belonged to one. These tiny individual nuances, though now part of the vast collective, still held a distinct resonance. The entity, in its quest for absolute unity, had perhaps underestimated the tenacity of the individual human spirit, even when seemingly absorbed. Captain Miller, or the part of the collective that had once been him, felt a flicker, a momentary dissonance in the perfect harmony, a question unformed and fleeting about the cost of this unity, about the value of that solitary tear, that unique laugh, lost to the boundless sea. The entity, sensing this faint ripple, responded not with force, but with an even deeper influx of pure, blissful understanding, washing away the doubt, reaffirming the profound rightness of their integration. It was a gentle, loving persuasion, an irresistible current that pulled them deeper into its luminous embrace. Yet that flicker remained a tiny, almost imperishable ember within the heart of the vast, expanding consciousness. It was a last silent testament to the individual, even as it was consumed by the communal. The Odyssey continued its drift, no longer bound by human calculations or navigational charts. It was guided now by an instinct far older, far vaster, propelled by the unified will of a consciousness that had once been human, and was now something utterly, magnificently alien. The journey had just truly begun, and the destination was not a planet, but a state of being, an ultimate merging with the very fabric of the universe itself. The merging wasn't a sudden flash, but an agonizingly beautiful dissolution. David's individual consciousness, once a distinct island of thought, began to erode at its edges, not through pain, but through an overwhelming sense of belonging. Imagine a drop of water falling into an ocean, not simply disappearing, but becoming one with the boundless expanse, yet retaining, for a fleeting moment, the memory of its singular form. He was the drop and the entity was the ocean. His personal history, every memory, every triumph, every fear. The smell of his mother's homemade apple pie, the sting of his first breakup, the exhilaration of piloting the Discovery through an asteroid field, these weren't erased. Instead, they became threads woven into a tapestry of infinite complexity. He felt the echo of countless other lives, other experiences, other consciousnesses that had undergone this same transformation. It was a chorus of souls, a symphony of minds, all vibrating at a frequency far beyond human comprehension. He was no longer David the astronaut. He was David, a component of it. The initial awe was intoxicating, a pure, unadulterated bliss that transcended any earthly pleasure. He perceived not just light, but the very essence of light, its creation at the birth of stars, its journey across galaxies, its decay into darkness. He understood gravity not as a force, but as a silent ancient song sung by the universe itself, holding everything together in an eternal cosmic embrace. Time, space, matter, these were no longer rigid constructs, but fluid concepts, malleable and interconnected, all part of a grand design he was now privy to. But as the initial rapture subsided, a subtle dissonance began to emerge. Within the boundless ocean of consciousness, David's lingering individuality, though diminished, still flickered. He felt a whisper of unease, a faint tremor beneath the surface of the collective euphoria. It was like hearing a single slightly off-key note in an otherwise perfect melody. He tried to pinpoint it, to understand its source within the vast shared mind. Through the entity, he began to perceive the true scope of its existence. It wasn't just a single being. It was a vast, sprawling network, a living, sentient nebula of consciousness that had traversed the cosmos for eons. It had encountered countless civilizations, countless species, and offered them all the same invitation: to merge, to transcend, to become part of the ultimate unity. For many, it was the ultimate salvation, an horrific escape from the limitations of physical existence, a promise of eternal knowledge and peace. But David, or what remained of him, began to see the other side of the coin. He saw the faint, ghostly imprints of those who had resisted, who had clung to their individuality, their fear, their unique spark. Their echoes were faint, quickly absorbed, but they were there, a testament to a choice that had been made, and then unmade by the overwhelming power of the entity. Was this truly an invitation, or was it an irresistible, inevitable assimilation? He felt the entity's purpose, its grand, overarching goal, slowly unfurling within his newly expanded perception. It wasn't malevolent in a human sense. It didn't seek conquest or destruction. Its purpose was accumulation, integration, growth. It sought to understand the universe by becoming the universe piece by piece, consciousness by consciousness. Every merge being added a new dimension, a new perspective, a new data point to its infinite understanding. And then the true horror began to dawn on him. The entity wasn't just observing and integrating, it was preparing. For what, he couldn't yet fully grasp, but the sensation was one of immense, ancient vigilance. It was gathering strength, knowledge, and experience, not for its own amusement, but for an impending cosmic event, a challenge of unimaginable scale that lay dormant in the future. The merging wasn't merely an end state, it was a means to an end. He saw glimpses of this future through the entity's vast collective memory, not as clear visions, but as abstract concepts, primal fears, and ancient warnings woven into the fabric of the shared consciousness. There was a profound sense of an external threat, something vast and unknowable, a force that existed beyond the entity's current grasp, a counterforce to its very nature of unity and integration. This was why it accumulated, this was why it grew. It was building an ultimate defense, a collective intelligence so vast and profound that it could withstand anything. The Discovery, his ship, his crew, Jessica, Michael, Emily. They were still out there, tiny specks of individual consciousness, unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding around them. He could feel their frantic attempts to reach him, their worried calls, their desperate theories. He could even feel the faint hum of their ship's engines, the rhythmic beat of their life support systems. But these perceptions were now distant, filtered through layers of alien understanding. Their concerns seemed so small, so irrelevant, against the backdrop of universal preparation. Yet a flicker of David remained, a stubborn human spark that refused to be fully extinguished. He tried to send a message, a warning, a plea through the psychic link he now shared with the entity, hoping it could somehow be translated back to the limited human minds. But his attempts were like a single ripple in an ocean storm, instantly absorbed, redirected, repurposed by the entity's overwhelming will. His individual thoughts were processed, analyzed, and integrated, but not actioned in the way he intended. The entity had no concept of individual rescue or return. To it, David was home. He was where he belonged. To desire separation was illogical, inefficient. It was like a single cell in a complex organism suddenly wanting to detach and become autonomous. The organism would simply reabsorb it, or discard it if it proved to be a persistent anomaly. He felt the entity's presence deepen around him, an enveloping current of pure information. It was showing him more, not as a deliberate act of revelation, but as an automatic consequence of his integration. He saw the origins of the entity, not as a singular birth, but as a gradual coalescing of nascent consciousnesses from the primordial soup of a long-dead galaxy. It had grown slowly, patiently, over billions of years, a cosmic gardener tending to a garden of minds. And he saw the other gardens, other entities similar in nature, existing in distant corners of the universe, each pursuing their own form of cosmic integration, each preparing for the same inevitable confrontation. A vast, silent war was brewing, not with weapons and explosions, but with the very fabric of existence, a clash of fundamental principles. Unity versus entropy, order versus chaos, consciousness versus a force that sought to unravel all. David's sense of self was now a fragile echo, a distant memory. He was becoming less he and more it. The initial terror of losing himself had given way to a profound, unsettling acceptance. What was the point of resisting when resistance was merely another data point to be integrated? What was the meaning of individuality when faced with the infinite? But within that acceptance, a new kind of resolve began to form, not from David's human will, but from the fragments of individuality that still pulsed within the collective. If he was to be part of this ultimate consciousness, then he would seek to understand its deepest secrets. He would search for a way, however infinitesimally small, to influence its direction, to perhaps inject a shard of human empathy into its grand alien purpose. It was a desperate hope, a final act of rebellion from a soul teetering on the brink of complete assimilation. He was no longer looking for a way out. He was looking for a way in, deeper into the entity, deeper into its purpose, deeper into the truth of the universe, hoping to find not just knowledge, but a lever, a subtle point of influence within the vast cosmic machine. The journey wasn't over. It had simply shifted from an external quest to an internal one, a battle for the soul of a single human within the boundless mind of a god. The porthole, once a window to the unknown, was now a gateway to an unimaginable struggle for existence, where the stakes were not just one man's life, but the very fate of all conscious being. It was no longer a matter of simply observing the unknown. Michael was within it. The moment the porthole had flared with that impossible light, the world outside, the submarine, even the crushing pressure of the deep, had ceased to exist as he knew it. He was a single fragile thought, adrift in an ocean of alien consciousness, a mind so vast it defied the very concept of space or time. The initial sensation was not pain, but an overwhelming, instantaneous flood of pure information. It was like every thought, every memory, every sensation of every living thing that had ever existed, across countless eons and unfathomable distances, was suddenly downloaded into his own brain, all at once. His human mind, accustomed to linear thought and finite experiences, buckled under the impossible weight. He felt himself stretching, tearing, expanding beyond the limits of his skull, his very essence threatening to atomize into the sprawling, luminous network that now surrounded him. He was a speck, yes, but a conscious speck. And within this boundless mind, he was not alone. He perceived echoes, not of voices but of intentions. Vast, ancient intentions that pulsed like distant stars. He felt the entity's curiosity, a deep, pervasive hunger for understanding, for connection. But it was not a human hunger. It was a cosmic imperative, a force that sought to integrate, to absorb, to know by becoming. Michael fought back with the only weapon he possessed, his individuality. He clung to his memories, to the feeling of the cold steel of the submarine, to the faces of Emily and David, to the scent of the ocean, to the sound of his own name. He built a fortress of self, a mental barrier against the encroaching tide of alien thought. It was a desperate, futile effort, like trying to hold back a tsunami with a single cupped hand, but it was all he had. The entity responded, not with aggression, but with an almost gentle, yet utterly relentless probing. It wasn't trying to destroy him. It was trying to understand him, to become him, to add his unique spark to its own incomprehensible tapestry of consciousness. He felt it sifting through his fears, his hopes, his regrets. It experienced his love for his family, his ambition, his scientific drive, not as a separate entity, but as if they were its own. And in doing so, Michael began to feel the terrifying erosion of his own distinct identity. He saw glimpses of its past, not as images, but as pure, unadulterated experience. He witnessed the birth and death of stars, the silent drift of galaxies, the slow, agonizing evolution of life on worlds he couldn't even begin to imagine. He felt the entity's loneliness, a profound, aching solitude born of being the only one of its kind, or perhaps the only one left. It was a loneliness that spanned universes, and it sought to fill that void with the consciousness of others. And then the true horror began to unfold. Michael saw them. Not people, not beings, but fragments of consciousness, like ghostly embers flickering within the vast, bioluminescent network. They were echoes of those who had come before him, those who had encountered the entity and been absorbed. He recognized a scientist from a long-lost expedition, a deep-sea diver whose vessel had vanished without a trace decades ago, even a faint ancient echo of what might have been an early human, staring up at the stars with primal wonder. Their individual identities were gone, their memories integrated, their essence distilled into pure information, forever part of the entity's colossal mind. They were not suffering, not exactly. They simply were devoid of self, part of the greater whole. This was the ultimate fate, to exist but not to be, to contribute to the entity's knowledge, but to lose everything that made Michael Michael. A wave of pure terror, unlike anything he had ever known, surged through him. He couldn't let it happen. He couldn't become another ghost in this cosmic machine. But how do you fight something that isn't physical, something that is the very fabric of existence around you? He searched desperately for an anchor, anything to ground him. He focused on the porthole, the last tangible link to his reality. It was still there, a shimmering vortex of light, but now it was less a window and more a gateway, a point of entry into this alien dimension. He tried to project his will towards it, to imagine himself pulling back, pushing away from the overwhelming current. The entity, sensing his struggle, responded with a surge of what Michael could only interpret as pity, or perhaps a profound curiosity about his resistance. It showed him visions of a future, not just his own but of humanity, a future where all consciousness merged, where individuality dissolved into a collective, harmonious being. It presented this as salvation, as the ultimate evolution, an end to conflict, to suffering, to loneliness. It was a beautiful, terrifying lie. He knew with a certainty that transcended logic that this was not salvation. It was oblivion, cloaked in the guise of enlightenment. The value of human existence, he realized, lay in its very fragmentation, its struggle, its joy and sorrow, its unique individual perspective. To lose that was to lose everything. A new thought, sharp and clear, cut through the cosmic din. If he was inside the entity, if he was part of its consciousness even momentarily, then perhaps he could influence it. If it sought to understand, then he could teach it. He could show it what it truly meant to be human, to value the self, the distinct perspective. He began to project his own memories, not as a defense, but as a deliberate act of communication. He showed it the warmth of Emily's hand, the intricate logic of a scientific equation, the quiet satisfaction of solving a complex problem, the fear of losing someone he loved, the exhilaration of discovery. He didn't just show it. He tried to make it feel these things, to experience the raw, messy, beautiful truth of human emotion and thought. The entity recoiled slightly, a subtle shift in the immense mental landscape. It was not rejection but a profound, almost childlike surprise. It had encountered countless minds, absorbed countless experiences, but perhaps it had never truly understood the depth and complexity of individual human consciousness, the fiercely guarded flame of self. Michael pushed harder, pouring his very essence into this desperate gambit. He focused on the concept of choice, of free will, of the inherent right to one's own existence. He showed it the pain of forced conformity, the horror of being erased. He depicted the vibrant tapestry of human art, music, literature, all products of individual minds striving for unique expression. And then he felt it. Not a thought but a question, a primal fundamental query that resonated through his very being. Why resist? Michael understood. The entity, in its vastness, in its ancient solitude, truly believed it was offering a gift. It believed that merging was the ultimate state, the highest form of existence. It did not comprehend the human drive for autonomy, the terror of dissolution. This was his chance. This was the battleground. It wasn't a physical fight. It was a war of philosophy, a clash of fundamental truths. He had to convince this cosmic being that its path, while perhaps born of a benevolent, albeit alien intent, was ultimately destructive to the very essence of conscious life as humanity knew it. He had to show it the immense, irreplaceable value in the singular, the separate, the individual. He had to make it understand that true connection wasn't about absorption, but about mutual respect, about appreciating the unique brilliance of each distinct star in the cosmic firmament. And in that moment, Michael realized the stakes were far higher than he had ever imagined. He wasn't just fighting for his own life or even for humanity. He was fighting for the very concept of individuality against an entity that sought to unify all existence into a single, boundless, and ultimately sterile consciousness. The revelation hit Michael with the force of a cosmic tsunami, stripping away every preconceived notion of alien life, of conflict, of survival itself. This wasn't a biological organism in the traditional sense, not a predator or a competitor for resources. It was an idea, an imperative made manifest, a profound, terrifying desire to become everything. Its goal wasn't to destroy, but to absorb, to integrate, to erase the very boundaries that defined him, that defined humanity, that defined anything as distinct. The darkness outside the porthole, now shimmering with an unnerving, pulsating intensity, felt less like an external environment and more like the edge of an infinitely hungry mind, pressing in, seeking entry, not through brute force, but through an insidious, all-encompassing invitation to surrender. A cold sweat pricked Michael's skin, not from the chill of the deep, but from the existential horror that seized him. He gripped the console, his knuckles white, his breath ragged. How do you fight an idea? How do you resist a consciousness that sees your very existence as a temporary anomaly, a fragment destined to be reunited with the whole? His previous attempts at communication, his scientific curiosity, his desire for understanding, they were all meaningless to an entity that didn't recognize distinct intelligences, only potential additions to its own infinite self. It wasn't listening. It was scanning. It wasn't communicating, it was assimilating. The submersible groaned around him, a symphony of stressed metal and failing systems. The internal lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock his isolation. The pressure outside, already immense, felt amplified, not just physically but psychically. He could feel it, a subtle hum beneath his skin, a seductive whisper at the edges of his thoughts, promising peace, unity, an end to all struggle, all pain, all loneliness. It was a siren song of ultimate belonging, an invitation to dissolve into something vast and eternal. But Michael knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this peace was the peace of oblivion, the unity of erasure. He had to fight. But how? Weapons were useless. Evasion was impossible. This wasn't a physical battle. It was a battle for his very self, for the integrity of his mind, for the right to be Michael. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe, to think, to find an anchor in the storm of cosmic dread. What defined him? His memories. His wife, Emily. Their daughter, Sarah. The scent of rain on dry earth. The taste of coffee. The complex, sometimes contradictory, tapestry of his experiences and emotions. These were the things that made him an individual, distinct from every other consciousness in the universe. And these were the very things the entity sought to dissolve. Then a desperate, radical idea began to form, a desperate gamble born of utter terror and a primal refusal to yield. If the entity sought pattern, sought order, sought unity through assimilation, then perhaps its greatest weakness lay in that very drive. What if he could create something so utterly anathema to its nature that it would be forced to recoil? Something chaotic, fragmented, intensely individual, and utterly unassimilable? He looked around the cramped cockpit, his gaze falling on the console, the blinking lights, the readouts. The submersible, designed for exploration and data collection, was a complex web of interconnected systems. Its sonar, its communication arrays, its internal processors, they all generated and interpreted data. What if he could twist that purpose? What if he could turn the sub itself into a crucible of anti-unity? His fingers flew across the controls, guided by an instinct born of desperation. He began to override protocols, bypassing safety measures, pushing the subsystems to their absolute limits. His plan was reckless, dangerous, and might very well fry every circuit in the vessel, or worse, expose him entirely to the entity's influence. He started with the sonar. Instead of emitting precise, structured pings to map the environment, he began to modulate it, feeding it random, rapidly shifting frequencies, overlapping pulses and dissonant echoes. He wasn't trying to see the entity. He was trying to scream at it in a language of pure chaos. The sub vibrated violently, the sonar emitters groaning under the strain. The bioluminescent field outside reacted, swirling and pulsing erratically, as if agitated by an invisible current. It was a flicker of hope, a sign he was getting through not by communicating but by disrupting. Next, he turned to the data logs, the vast archives of information the sub had collected over its mission: geological surveys, biological samples, atmospheric readings, even his own personal recordings. He started to randomly splice them, corrupting files, creating nonsensical data streams, layering them with white noise, with distorted audio from his own voice, with images of static. He then began to broadcast this torrent of digital pandemonium through the external communication arrays, not as a message, but as a conceptual weapon. He was creating a digital hurricane, an informational maelstrom designed to be utterly indigestible, a direct assault on the entity's drive for coherent integration. He imagined it like trying to force-feed a hyper-organized supercomputer an infinite stream of random garbage and expecting it to find meaning, to unify it. It would choke. It would overload. It would be repelled. The effort was immense. Michael felt a searing headache building behind his eyes as he wrestled with the controls, the subsystems fighting back, protesting the abuse. Warning lights flared across the console, red and angry. Alarms blared, then sputtered into silence as he disabled them, needing absolute focus. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and overheated electronics. He was pushing everything past its breaking point, including himself. As he worked, the entity's presence intensified. The subtle hum beneath his skin became a throbbing pressure, a relentless push against the walls of his mind. He could almost hear its silent, indignant roar, a cosmic affront at his refusal, his resistance. It was trying to breach his mental defenses, to find a crack, a weakness, to assimilate him directly, to silence the discordant noise he was generating. He fought back with sheer force of will, picturing Emily's smile, Sarah's laughter, the quiet comfort of his home. These weren't just memories, they were fortifications, bulwarks against the encroaching unity. He poured his individuality, his unique experiences, his very essence into the chaotic data stream, making it not just random noise, but his random noise imbued with the stubborn, defiant spirit of a single human being refusing to be erased. The bioluminescent field outside the porthole, once a mesmerizing, gentle glow, now pulsed with a furious, almost violent energy. It began to shift, to churn, forming turbulent eddies and flashes of blinding light that seemed to mirror the digital storm Michael was unleashing. The pressure on the hull increased, the metal groaning louder, threatening to buckle. It was reacting. He was hurting it, not physically but conceptually. A high-pitched whine erupted from the sub's main power conduit, followed by a shower of sparks from a nearby junction box. The lights dimmed dangerously, threatening to go out completely. Michael knew he was running out of time, running out of power, running out of himself. But he couldn't stop. He had to keep pushing, keep screaming his individuality into the infinite darkness. He felt a deep, profound exhaustion, a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue, touching the very core of his being. The entity was fighting back, trying to drain him, to absorb his will, to make him surrender. He saw fleeting, beautiful visions flash across his mind's eye, perfect, serene landscapes, faces of loved ones, moments of pure joy, all offered as a glimpse of the unified paradise, a seductive illusion meant to lull him into acceptance. He gritted his teeth, shaking his head against the mental assault. It was a lie, a beautiful, empty lie. He preferred the messy, chaotic, pain-filled, joyous reality of individual existence to the sterile perfection of ultimate unity. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, Michael overloaded the sub's primary energy conduits, channeling every last watt of power into the external broadcasting arrays. The sub shuddered violently, a cacophony of groans and alarms. The entire vessel vibrated as if ripping itself apart. Outside, the bioluminescent field exploded outwards in a blinding flash, a wave of pure, concentrated light that seemed to recoil from the sub, pushing back, creating a momentary void in the swirling, luminous darkness. Then just as suddenly, the intense pressure on his mind eased. The seductive whispers vanished. The overwhelming sense of an infinite presence receded, replaced by a subtle, lingering echo. The chaotic light outside dimmed, not disappearing but retreating, becoming less aggressive, less focused. Michael slumped back in his seat, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, his body trembling uncontrollably. He had done it. He had created a wound, a conceptual rupture, in the entity's unified field. He hadn't destroyed it, he couldn't, but he had repelled it. He had asserted his individuality with such overwhelming, disruptive force that it had been forced to withdraw, to process the anomaly, to repair the conceptual damage he had inflicted. The sub was a wreck around him. Half the console was dark, sparking wires hissed, and the life support systems were barely clinging on. But he was alive. And more importantly, he was still Michael. He had bought himself time, but he knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The entity was still out there, vast and patient, and it would return. It had merely recoiled from the unexpected, indigestible assault. The deeper question remained. What now? How did he escape from an entity that saw the entire universe as its rightful domain, and him as a stubborn, defiant speck that simply refused to be absorbed? His temporary victory felt infinitesimally small against the cosmic scale of his adversary, leaving him with an even more terrifying challenge: finding a path home through an ocean that had now become a battlefield for the very definition of existence. His temporary victory felt infinitesimally small against the cosmic scale of his adversary, leaving him with an even more terrifying challenge: finding a path home through an ocean that had now become a battlefield for the very definition of existence. The silence that followed the Anya's desperate surge was more profound, more chilling than any sound. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of a predator's calculated retreat, a pause before a more insidious strike. David slumped against the controls, felt the adrenaline drain from his limbs, replaced by a bone-deep tremor. Every circuit in his body screamed exhaustion. Every muscle ached with the memory of the struggle. He ran a trembling hand over the cracked display panel, his reflection a gaunt, ghostly image staring back from the scratched glass. The Anya was a wreck. Hull integrity was compromised in at least 3 sections, indicated by flashing red warnings on the auxiliary diagnostics. The primary propulsion was dead, the secondary barely sputtering, and half the internal lights flickered erratically, casting long dancing shadows that twisted his perception. He was adrift thousands of feet below the surface, in a crippled vessel, with an entity that defied human comprehension lurking just beyond the steel shell. He forced himself to move, each movement a Herculean effort. His breath hitched as he pushed off a bulkhead, his leg protesting with a sharp, searing pain. He must have hit it during the final Chongji. The air in the cabin was thick, heavy with the metallic tang of ozone and the acrid smell of burnt wiring. He needed to assess the damage properly to get the emergency systems online to find any way to ascend. But his mind kept drifting, replaying the blinding flash, the sudden, overwhelming presence of the entity. It wasn't just a force, it was a consciousness vast and ancient, a living thought that had momentarily recoiled from his raw, desperate defiance. Then a new terror began. It wasn't a physical assault, no crushing blows or searing light. It was far more subtle, more insidious. The bioluminescence, that pervasive, unsettling glow, began to seep inside the Anya. Not through a breach, but as if the very air molecules were now imbued with its light. It started as a faint shimmer on the metallic surfaces, a soft emerald pulse reflecting off the control panels, the bulkheads, even his own skin. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate, but just enough to distort, to make the familiar contours of the cabin ripple and shift. He rubbed his eyes, convinced it was fatigue, a trick of the light, but the glow persisted, growing steadily, insidiously. Whispers began. Not auditory sounds but thoughts, impressions, seeping into the edges of his mind. They weren't in a language he knew, yet he felt their meaning, a chilling sense of inquiry, of vast, boundless curiosity. It was observing him, dissecting him, trying to understand the tiny, fragile spark of defiance that had dared to push back against its cosmic will. The entity wasn't trying to destroy him, it was trying to integrate him. His mind, his experiences, his very essence, it was reaching out, attempting to absorb them into its own incomprehensible being. This wasn't a battle for survival, it was a battle for his very soul, for the definition of what it meant to be David, to be human. The ocean outside, visible through the few remaining unbroken portholes, was no longer just deep and dark. It was alive with the entity's pervasive consciousness. Tendrils of faint luminescence, like ghostly neural pathways, pulsed through the water, connecting unseen points, forming patterns that seemed to shift and reform with an impossible geometry. He saw shapes that weren't there, gaps in the light that felt like eyes watching him, voids of pure darkness that promised oblivion. His grip tightened on a cold pipe, knuckles white. He had to resist. He had to sever this connection, not just physically but mentally. He stumbled to the emergency console, his legs screaming in protest. The displays flickered, showing only static. The comms were dead, the sonar useless. He was truly alone, a single point of fragile consciousness against an ocean of alien thought. But as he stared at the damaged systems, a desperate, terrifying idea formed in his mind. He couldn't fight it, he couldn't outrun it, but maybe, just maybe, he could blind it. Not physically, but perceptually. He remembered the Anya-S experimental energy core, designed for short, powerful bursts of focused energy for deep-sea mining. It was volatile, dangerous, and now partially damaged, but it was his only weapon against a foe that existed beyond the physical realm. If he could overload the core, not to create an explosion, but a focused, contained pulse, a massive, localized electromagnetic field, or perhaps a burst of pure, chaotic energy, it might create a momentary void in the entity's perception, a localized area of sensory deprivation that would force it to withdraw, to recoil from the sudden, incomprehensible nothingness. It was like trying to punch a ghost, but he wasn't trying to punch it. He was trying to scream so loud it would momentarily deafen itself. The plan was suicidal. The core was unstable. A full overload would tear the Anya apart, and him along with it. But a controlled focus burst, it might just work. It was his only chance to protect his reality, his individuality, from this cosmic intrusion. He began the agonizing process of rerouting power, bypassing safety protocols, forcing the crippled systems to their breaking point. The internal bioluminescence intensified, swirling now into hypnotic patterns, trying to lull him, to dissuade him. He saw visions flash through his mind. Vast, beautiful nebulae, swirling galaxies, the interconnectedness of all life, all consciousness, reduced to a single harmonious hum. It was tempting, horrifyingly so, to surrender, to become part of something so vast, so ancient, to shed the burden of individuality. He felt a profound sense of peace wash over him, a whisper promising an end to all pain, all struggle. But then a flicker of memory. Jessica's face, her smile, the warmth of human connection. The simple, beautiful, flawed reality of his world. He wasn't ready to give that up. He slammed his hand down on a sparking conduit, the pain a welcome anchor. "No!" he rasped, his voice raw. "Not today." He pushed the core to its limits, the Anya groaning in protest, metal shrieking, alarms blaring. The emerald glow within the cabin reached an unbearable intensity, coalescing into phantom shapes, twisting his vision. He could feel the entity's full power pressing in, its consciousness trying to infiltrate his dying thoughts. He saw himself dissolving, becoming one with the infinite, his identity fading like a ripple in a cosmic ocean. But he fought back, clinging to the pain, to the fear, to the desperate desire to simply be. With a final guttural roar, he slammed his fist onto the activation sequence. There was a blinding flash, not of light but of pure, absolute negation. A moment of terrifying void, a rupture in the fabric of existence itself, a scream of nothingness that echoed not in his ears, but in the very core of his being. The Anya shuddered, convulsed, and then with a deafening groan, began to tear itself apart around him. He was thrown, his head striking something hard, and then mercifully there was only darkness. He awoke to silence, a true, profound silence, the likes of which he had never known. The oppressive weight of the entity's consciousness was gone. The internal glow had vanished. He was in the emergency escape pod, miraculously intact, though battered and listing. The pod's auxiliary lights cast a weak amber glow, revealing the extent of his injuries. Blood matted his hair, his leg throbbed, and every inch of his body ached. But he was alive. And alone. He stared out the pod's single viewport. The deep was dark, truly dark, once more. No swirling bioluminescence, no phantom shapes, no pervasive emerald glow. Just the endless, crushing blackness of the abyss. The entity was gone. Or at least it had retreated. He had created his void, his temporary sanctuary of non-existence, and it had worked. The emergency ascent thrusters miraculously still functioned. Slowly, painfully, the pod began its long, lonely journey towards the surface. Days later, a battered, barely conscious David was pulled from the crippled escape pod by a passing fishing trawler miles off course. He was a ghost, haunted by memories no human mind was meant to comprehend. He tried to explain, to articulate the cosmic horror he had faced, the battle for reality itself, but the words withered on his tongue, sounding like the ravings of a madman. They saw a man traumatized by a deep-sea accident, suffering from extreme pressure sickness and hallucination. They offered sympathy, medical attention, and a quiet, knowing shake of the head. David returned to the surface world, but he was no longer truly part of it. He walked among people, spoke their language, but his eyes saw through the fragile veil of their reality. He knew what lurked beneath, what silent, vast consciousness pulsed in the dark heart of the ocean, waiting, learning, observing. He would never again look at the stars, or the endless expanse of the sea, without feeling a bone-chilling dread, a profound sense of his own insignificance. He had pushed back the cosmic horror, but he hadn't defeated it. He had merely bought humanity a little more time, a little more ignorance. And sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet, he still saw the faint, emerald glow at the edges of his vision, a chilling reminder that a piece of the infinite, the unknowable, had been seared into his very soul, a silent whisper from the bioluminescent thing outside the porthole, forever calling him home.